The sun had just started to rise over the narrow streets of Ashoknagar, a modest neighborhood in Chennai. The morning light touched the edges of every wall, every roof, every little stall that lined the road. But inside a small, dimly lit kitchen, a woman was already awake. Her name was Lakshmi Pichai. Lakshmi moved quietly, her fingers trembling slightly as she poured tea into 2 old steel cups. She wore a faded sari, soft from years of use. Her hands were rough, her eyes gentle. She looked out the small window, where a boy once used to sit, reading by sunlight before school. That boy was now the CEO of Google. But to her, he was still just Sundar, her Sundar. She placed the cup on the table and sat down, taking a slow breath. Her body ached from the years of work. She had cleaned houses, cooked for others, and sold food at roadside stalls. Not once did she complain. Not once did she ask the world for anything. But today felt different outside. Someone knocked on the gate. Lakshmi opened the door and smiled. At the man standing there, an old neighbor named Ramesh. He didn't smile back. Instead, he looked at her with narrowed eyes. "You walk around like you're something now," he said coldly. "Your son sits in America and sends money, so you think you're better than us." The words hit Lakshmi like a slap. She didn't know what to say. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She hadn't asked for praise. She had lived simply, just like before. She had always offered tea, always helped the neighbors when they were sick. But now, just because her son had made something of himself, people began to whisper behind her back. "You forgot where you came from," Ramesh said, and turned away. Lakshmi closed the door slowly. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she sat down at the table again, still holding the second cup of tea. It was meant for Sundar. Even though he was far away, she made him tea every morning. It was her way of staying close. That evening, Lakshmi walked to the market. People stared. She heard snickers behind her. 2 women at a fruit stall whispered, "She acts so humble, but look how proud she's become." Lakshmi lowered her eyes. She bought what she needed and walked home. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached her door, someone was already waiting there. He stood quietly, holding a small bag in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. He wore a plain shirt, glasses, and a soft expression. Lakshmi stopped in her tracks. He said gently. It was Sundar. Lakshmi froze. Her heart skipped. She hadn't known he was coming. He walked forward and touched her feet. "I came home," he said, "because I heard your silence." She tried to speak, but her throat tightened. Inside the house, they sat together. Sundar took her hand. She was shaking, though she tried to hide it. "Amma," he whispered, "I heard what happened." Lakshmi looked away, ashamed. "They think I've changed," she said softly. "They think I've become proud." Sundar reached into his bag and pulled out an old notebook. The pages were yellow, corners torn. "Do you remember this?" he asked. Lakshmi's fingers brushed the cover. Her eyes widened. "You wrote my name in here," he said, flipping to a page. "And every time I failed a test, you wrote the words, 'Try again.'" Sundar. A tear slid down her cheek. "Amma," he continued, "you taught me never to give up. You gave me strength when we had nothing. You never asked for anything. And now, when they whisper, let them." She looked at him, stunned. "They whisper because they cannot understand strength that speaks softly," he said. The next morning, Sundar walked with her to the market. People stopped and stared, this time in silence. No one dared to speak. Ramesh stood at his gate, mouth slightly open. Sundar nodded politely, but it wasn't the nod that silenced them. It was the way Sundar held his mother's hand, not with pride, not with arrogance, but with deep, quiet respect. Lakshmi didn't say anything. She didn't have to, because in that moment, everyone understood something powerful. No success could ever arise higher than the woman. who built it with her bare hands and quiet heart, and no insult could ever reach the soul of a mother who had already given everything. That was the day everything changed, but it was only the beginning. The sun rose slowly over Chennai, casting a golden hue across the rooftops. But inside Lakshmi Pichai's home, the warmth of the light couldn't reach the chill in her heart. Even though Sundar was back, even though he had held her hand in front of everyone, the pain inside her hadn't vanished. Something still ached deep within her, a quiet wound, carved by years of whispers, quiet judgments, and the weight of being seen, but never truly known. Sundar was in the small room he used to study in, now filled with old books, cracked walls, and faded memories. He sat cross-legged on the floor, gently wiping dust from his childhood textbooks. Lakshmi stood by the door, watching him. "Do you remember how you used to fall asleep with your head on that pile of books?" she said softly. He smiled. "And you used to come in and scold me for not eating dinner." They both laughed, but behind that laughter was something unspoken. Later that afternoon, Sundar decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. He didn't wear anything fancy, just a plain shirt and slippers. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to see the streets that had raised him. As he passed the tea stall near the old bus stop, a few boys stopped playing cricket. They stared, eyes wide. "That's him," one whispered. "Isn't that the Google man?" Sundar smiled politely and kept walking. But not far away, Ramesh stood again, arms folded. "He thinks coming here changes everything," he muttered too. "Another man. Money doesn't wash away where you come from." The words reached Sundar's ears. He paused. He turned to Ramesh and walked up to him, not with anger, not with pride, but with a calm, unshakable grace. "Sir," Sundar said, "can I ask you something?" Ramesh was caught off guard. "When you were a child," Sundar continued, "who taught you how to walk?" Ramesh blinked, unsure how to respond. "For me, it was my mother," Sundar said. "She also taught me how to speak, how to be patient, how to respect others, even when they do not respect you back." Ramesh didn't speak. "You may not know her the way I do," Sundar added, "but when you speak about her, you are speaking about the woman who gave me everything without asking for anything in return." The crowd grew quiet. The boys stopped their game. Even the wind seemed to pause. "If you want to judge someone," Sundar said gently, "judge me, not her." With that, he turned and walked away. Ramesh lowered his eyes. That night, Lakshmi sat alone on the veranda, looking up at the stars. Sundar joined her, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed her one, just like she used to hand him every morning. "I spoke to Ramesh," he said quietly. Lakshmi nodded, her face unreadable. "I didn't raise my voice," Sundar added. "I just told him the truth." Lakshmi looked at her son for a long moment. "Truth doesn't need volume," she said. "It only needs courage." A few days later, an unexpected knock came at the door. It was Ramesh. His head was bowed, his voice humble. "I came to say sorry," he said. "I didn't understand. I didn't see the strength you carry in silence." Lakshmi said nothing at first. She looked at him, eyes calm, then simply nodded. "Tea?" she asked. Ramesh smiled shyly. "Yes, please." Inside the small kitchen, she poured him a cup, and the world shifted again. News of Sundar's quiet return spread further. People in the area began to talk not with jealousy, but with pride. Mothers told their children stories of how Sundar used to carry books taller than himself. Fathers whispered about how he walked to school every day without complaint, wearing the same shoes until they tore. And always, they spoke of Lakshmi, of how she raised a boy not with money or power, but with values. One afternoon, from a local public school came to their door. She was nervous, holding a piece of paper in her hand. "Sir," she said to Sundar, "we want to invite you to speak at our school. Many of our students are losing hope. They think dreams are only for the rich." Sundar looked at his mother. Lakshmi smiled. Go, she said, but speak from your heart. That evening, Sundar stood in front of a small classroom packed with students. Their eyes were wide, notebooks open, pencils shaking in their hands. He didn't talk about Silicon Valley or boardrooms. Instead, he said, I used to sit in a room smaller than this. Our roof leaked when it rained. I didn't have a computer, not even a calculator, but my umashe gave me belief. That was enough to start. His voice cracked slightly. Dreams don't need money to start, he continued. They need someone to believe in you when no one else does. In the back of the room, Lakshmi watched from a quiet corner. No spotlight was on her, but every word from her son was a light that came from her shadow. That night, as the stars returned to the sky, a new whisper moved through the neighborhood, of gossip, but of quiet admiration. They no longer looked at Lakshmi with judgment. They looked at her with respect. But even then, she remained the same. She still wore her old sari. She still made her tea, and she still rose before the sun to clean the house with her own hands. Because, for Lakshmi, pichai strength was never about being seen. It was about never letting the world change your heart. The morning after Sundar spoke at the school, something shifted not in the world, but in Lakshmi's eyes. She walked slower now, not from weakness, but from reflection. Her life had always been about motion washing, cooking, earning, but now, moments of stillness began to hold meaning to people, no longer whispered cruel things as she passed. They nodded, some even smiled, but Lakshmi didn't bask in it. She simply continued as always, like nothing had changed. Because to her, real change wasn't measured by praise. It was measured by peace. Still, peace was not something that lasted long in the world outside. That week, a fancy black car rolled into the neighborhood, stopping outside the pichai home. Its windows were dark, its tires clean, its presence unfamiliar to a street used to bicycles and old scooters. A man in a white shirt stepped out. He wore expensive sunglasses and carried a phone he never looked up from. Is this Sundar Pichai's house? He asked in English, barely glancing at the boy, who pointed silently toward the gate. He knocked hard. 3 times. Lakshmi opened the door slowly, wiping her hands on her sari. The man looked her up and down and said, I'm here to speak with Mr. Sundar Pichai. Before she could answer, Sundar appeared behind her. Hello, he said calmly. I'm Sundar. The man straightened his tie. I represent a business delegation from Delhi. We're organizing a private gala for industry leaders. We want you there. People from all over the world will be attending. We can arrange everything: travel, stay, media. Sundar raised an eyebrow. And you'll be the star of the evening, the man said. We'll highlight your journey, your success. It'll be a story the nation never forgets. Lakshmi looked at her son. He didn't smile. Will my mother be invited? He asked. The man paused, clearly not expecting the question. Well, we assumed she wouldn't want the attention. Sundar stepped forward. Then I won't be attending. The man blinked. Sir. Sundar looked him in the eye. If you want to celebrate my story, you need to honor the first chapter. And that chapter is her. The man shifted uncomfortably, made a few polite excuses, and left without another word. After the car disappeared down the road, Lakshmi turned to Sundar. You didn't have to say that, Oma, he replied. They see the tree, but not the soil. I won't let them forget the soil. Lakshmi said nothing, but a small tear touched her cheek, not from pain, but from pride. Later that week, Lakshmi visited the local temple. As she stepped out, a group of women gathered around her. Some were from her youth, others younger. One woman, shy and soft-spoken, stepped forward with her daughter. Auntie, she said, my daughter wants to be a scientist, but people laugh at her. They say dreams are for the rich. Lakshmi knelt beside the girl. Do you like questions? She asked gently. The girl nodded. Double quotes then. Never stop asking them, Lakshmi whispered. Never stop learning. People may laugh, but one day, they'll listen. The girl smiled, and her mother wiped her eyes. As Lakshmi walked home, she passed the tea stall. Ramesh was sitting there, this time reading a newspaper. He looked up and said, "They put your son on the front page again." Lakshmi nodded, her face unreadable. "But this time," Ramesh added quietly, "they mentioned your name too." Lakshmi paused. "They wrote," he continued, "Sundar, Pichai, son of Lakshmi, returns home to honor his roots." A silence passed between them, then Lakshmi smiled gently. "Names are like seeds," she said. "They grow when they're watered with love." That night, Sundar and Lakshmi sat outside under the stars. "Do you regret anything, Oma?" Sundar asked softly. Lakshmi looked at the sky. "Sometimes," she said, "I wonder what life would have been if your father had lived longer, if we hadn't struggled so much. But then I see you, sitting here, asking me questions you don't need to ask, and I think, maybe this was the life we were meant to live." Sundar reached for her hand. "You gave me everything," he said, "and the world almost forgot your name." Lakshmi looked at him, eyes firm. "But you didn't," she whispered. The stars blinked above them. The world may have been watching Sundar Pichai, but he was still watching the woman who taught him to look up. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the world, 1,000 mothers heard her story through their own children's eyes. The next morning began with silence, but not the kind that hurts. This silence was soft, almost comforting, like the kind that comes before a rain that washes the world clean. Lakshmi was in the kitchen, her sari tucked in the same way it had been for decades, making dosa on the old iron pan. Sundar sat at the small wooden table, reading a tattered notebook, the one she had once filled with recipes, bills, and prayers for his exams. "Oma," he said, "do you ever miss the days when no one knew our name?" She flipped the dosa without looking up. "Sometimes, when life was hard but simple, and no one came to our door unless they truly needed something." Just then, there was a knock. This time, it was not a stranger, it was the headmaster from Sundar's old school. He looked nervous, clutching his cap in his hands. "Sir," he said to Sundar, "we're organizing the school's anniversary event. We'd be honored if you could come. The students look up to you." Lakshmi stepped forward. "He'll come." The headmaster looked surprised. "But on one condition," Lakshmi said. "No stage, no speeches. Just sit with the children, let them ask questions." He nodded quickly, both grateful and relieved. A few days later, Sundar arrived at the school with Lakshmi by his side. The old building hadn't changed much. The paint was still peeling. The fans still creaked. The walls still smelled like chalk and hope. But inside the main hall, hundreds of students waited, their eyes full of wonder. There was no fancy setup, just a circle of chairs in the center. Sundar sat in the middle. Lakshmi sat at the back quietly, blending in with the teachers. "You can ask me anything," Sundar told the children. At first, no one moved. Then a girl in the front row raised her hand. "Sir," she said, "did you ever feel small?" The question hung in the air. Sundar took a deep breath. "Every day," he said. "I felt small when I wore the same shirt for a whole week. I felt small when I couldn't afford the same lunch as my classmates. I felt small when I watched others go to computer class while I waited outside." He looked around the room, but then one day, I realized being small wasn't a weakness. It meant I had space to grow. And when you know how it feels to be small, you never look down on anyone else. A hush fell across the room. Another boy stood up. "Sir," he asked, "how did you not give up?" Sundar smiled. "Because of her," he said, pointing gently to the back. Where Lakshmi sat, every head turned. She shifted uncomfortably. "She taught me that failure is part of the road," Sundar said. "That you're not weak for falling, you're strong for standing up again." Lakshmi lowered her eyes. The headmaster stood up. "Mrs. Pichai, would you like to say a few words?" Lakshmi shook her head quickly. but the children began to clap softly, then louder. Finally, she stood and walked slowly to the front. I am not used to microphones, she said quietly, but I know what it means to believe in someone no one else does. Her voice trembled slightly. When Sundar was small, people said he dreamed too much. They said I should focus on getting him a job, not books. But I saw something in him, something kind, something curious. She looked at the children. If someone believes in you, hold that close. And if no one does, believe in yourself until they do. The room was silent. No phones rang. No fans buzzed. Just hearts, quietly thumping in unison. After the event, Lakshmi walked through the corridors. Her eyes scanned the walls, the broken windows, the same wooden bench where she once waited for Sundar. After class. A young teacher stopped her. Ma'am, she said, you've changed the way we think about mothers. We often forget the strength it takes to raise a child with dreams bigger than the world allows. Lakshmi nodded, saying nothing, because she knew now her silence had become a voice louder than she ever imagined. The next morning, a journalist called. He wanted to do an interview with Sundar about his visit, but Sundar said, interview my mother instead. They hesitated. We're not sure our readers would, Sundar interrupted. If you don't tell her story, you're not telling mine. And so they did. A week later, a small article appeared in a national newspaper. The mother behind the mind, how Lakshmi Pichai raised a dream. It wasn't a front-page piece, but it found its way into hands that mattered, and hearts that needed it, from across the country. Letters began to arrive. Handwritten notes from mothers in villages, from girls in classrooms, from men who had never said thank you to the women who raised them. Lakshmi read each one slowly, sometimes aloud. One letter said, you reminded me of my own Amma, who walked 3 miles to sell vegetables so I could finish school. Another said, I had given up on my daughter's dreams, not anymore. Lakshmi folded each letter carefully and placed it in an old wooden box, because to her, these were not just words. They were seeds, and one day, they would grow into something beautiful. Monsoon had arrived in Chennai. Rain poured gently over rooftops, tracing lines down the walls of Lakshmi Pichai's small home. The streets were wet, but clean. Everything felt washed, new. But inside, Lakshmi's heart, an old door was starting to creak open, one she had kept shut for years. It was Sundar who noticed it first. They were having tea on a quiet Sunday evening. Lightning danced far away in the clouds. Sundar looked at his mother and said, Uma, do you remember the storage room? Lakshmi stiffened. The one next to the bathroom, he added. She looked down at her cup. Why did we stop going inside? He asked gently. Lakshmi didn't answer for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper, because it held everything we lost. Later that night, she took the old key from the bottom drawer of her cupboard and walked slowly to the dusty door at the back of the house. Sundar followed. The room was dark. A single bulb flickered on after a few tries. The smell of time filled the air. Old papers, wood, cloth, and memories. They stood silently. On one shelf were boxers wrapped in plastic, marked with words like bills, receipts, and school forms. On another, a metal trunk sat, half open, holding an old sari, his father's diary, and a photo of Sundar as a boy, barefoot and smiling, standing beside a science fair poster he had made from torn cardboard. Lakshmi picked up the photo. We couldn't afford colored paper that year, she said quietly. So you colored it by hand. Sundar smiled. You stayed up with me until midnight, he replied. And then you sold 2 steel plates the next morning to get me bus fare. Her eyes glistened. In a corner of the room, Sundar found a small box tied with string. Inside it were dozens of rejection letters, college applications, job interviews, scholarship denials. He held them carefully. Amma, why did you keep these? She took the box from him, held it close to her chest. Because they're proof. You didn't stop." Her voice cracked. "And I needed that reminder on the days when food was short, or when people laughed at me for saying you would go far. They said I was wasting time, that I was dreaming too big." Sundar wrapped his arms around her. "You didn't dream big," he said. "You dreamed brave." They stayed in that room for hours, reading, remembering, rediscovering. The next day, Sundar made a quiet call to someone at a nearby college. He asked if they had any outreach programs for underprivileged schools. They did, but funding was low and interest even lower. "Can we host something?" Sundar asked. "Just small, something. Real?" And so it began. A few weeks later, a classroom in a local government school filled with students from all walks of life. Not with computers or high-tech screens, but with stories. Not just Sundar's stories, but Lakshmi's. He asked her to sit in front of the class and talk about decisions, hard ones, like choosing to send her son to a faraway school instead of saving for a roof repair, or walking alone at night just to find cheaper vegetables, or choosing hope when silence felt safer. Lakshmi hesitated at first, but then she spoke, and something changed in that room. One girl cried softly, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. A boy raised his hand and said, "My mother does the same, and I never saw it until now." Lakshmi reached out, touched his hand gently. "See her now," she said. "Don't wait." After the class ended, a teacher came up and said, "You've done more with your words than most people do with awards." Lakshmi smiled, her eyes tired but bright. She didn't want fame. She didn't want stage lights or headlines. She just wanted the next generation to understand that behind every successful child was often a mother who swallowed her hunger so they could eat, who stayed up in silence while the world slept, who was never seen but always there. But not everyone was ready to celebrate that. One evening, a social media post went viral. It mocked Lakshmi's old sari, her simple sandals, the way she sat on the floor during interviews. "She's the mother of a billionaire," the post read, "yet she looks like a maid." It spread fast. Lakshmi saw it quietly. She didn't flinch, but Sundar did. He paced the room that night, fists clenched, heart pounding. Double quotes, AMMA. "Why don't they see?" he asked. "Why do they measure worth by clothes and not by character?" Lakshmi sipped her tea slowly. "Because the world is still learning," she said, "and sometimes it needs to be taught softly." He looked at her. "Then let's teach it," he said, and they did. The next week, Sundar and Lakshmi were invited to a national education summit. Lakshmi wore the same simple sari. She sat on the same floor during the session break, sharing homemade snacks with the staff instead of the panelists. Photographers watched in confusion. A few quietly took pictures. One of those pictures showed Lakshmi giving a biscuit to a janitor. It was shared by a teacher, then by a student, then by a journalist. The caption was simple: "Dignity doesn't wear a brand, it wears a heart." Millions shared it. Some mocked it at first, but most understood, and Lakshmi never said a word about the post that had mocked her, because she didn't need to. The world had answered for her. The sky over Chennai was clear that morning. No clouds, no wind, just stillness. Inside their home, Lakshmi Pichai moved about quietly, folding clothes and setting a cup of tea near the window, just like she had every day for decades. Soon watched her, silently thinking how strange it was, how the world could change. Yet some things never would. That day, they were invited to a national award ceremony in Delhi. Sundar was to be honored for his contributions to technology, innovation, and leadership. It was a grand event, filled with powerful people, cameras flashing, red carpets rolled out like rivers of light. But Sundar made one request: "My mother must be seated beside me on stage." He told the organizers. They hesitated. "Usually, only recipients sit on stage." "Then I won't sit," he replied. They agreed. When Lakshmi heard this, she felt a wave of discomfort. "What will people think?" she asked. I don't belong on a stage. Sundar looked at her. You don't belong in the shadows either. They flew to Delhi that night. When they entered the auditorium, thousands of people turned. Applause rose like thunder. Sundar wore a simple gray suit. Lakshmi wore a cotton sari and walked beside him, holding his hand not out of weakness, but out of quiet strength. On stage, chairs were arranged in a line. Sundar helped Lakshmi sit first before taking his seat. The camera lights blinded, but neither of them flinched. They didn't come for fame. They came for truth. When it was time to speak, Sundar stepped up to the podium. He paused. The hall fell silent. Today, he began, I am honored to receive this recognition, but before I say anything else, I want to introduce the person who made this possible. He turned to Lakshmi. This is my Oma, he said. She taught me everything without ever stepping into a classroom. She worked so I could read. She walked so I could fly. The audience listened, some holding back tears. Many people celebrate success, he continued, but they forget the silence behind it, the hands that carried them when they were too tired, the voices that told them to try again when failure screamed louder. He took a deep breath. My mother was insulted once by people who thought success belonged to wealth or style. They didn't see her power, but I did. And today, I ask you all to see the mothers who never ask for applause, yet build the future with their bare hands. The room stood still. Then, one by one, people rose. Taught a standing ovation. Lakshmi sat frozen, hands in her lap, eyes lowered. She didn't smile for the cameras. She didn't wave, but in her stillness was a mountain. After the ceremony, journalists rushed to Sundar, but he pointed to Lakshmi. Ask her, he said. She's the story. One young reporter approached Lakshmi gently. Ma'am, she said, do you feel proud today? Lakshmi looked at her and said, I felt proud that first time he tied his own shoelaces. The world is just catching up. That night, back in their small home in Chennai, they sat in the same kitchen, the same table, the same 2 steel cups of tea between them. Amma, Sundar said, you've been on the biggest stage in the country. How does it feel? She smiled gently. Like the kitchen, she said, only warmer. A few weeks later, Sundar returned to the US, but Lakshmi stayed home. One morning she received a letter from a small village in Bihar. It was written by a girl named Meena. It said, Dear Lakshmi Pichai, I used to think dreams were for others, but after hearing about you, I've started dreaming too. I want to build something that helps others. I want to be like you, not famous, just good. Lakshmi placed the letter in her wooden box, beside all the others. Then she opened a blank notebook. At the top of the first page, she wrote, If you're reading this, believe one thing, you matter, even when no one sees you yet. And she began writing letters to girls who had written her one by one. Not to give advice, but to remind them of their worth. She didn't speak to cameras. She spoke to hearts, and slowly, those hearts became her voice. Her story became a chapter in schools. A short documentary was made, called The Mother Behind the Mind. It was shown in colleges across the country, and people began asking different questions, real ones, like, who made the person we admire? What sacrifices built this path? How many silent heroes live around us, uncelebrated? One day Sundar called Lakshmi from California. Amma, he said, they asked me to speak at another big event. World leaders will be there. Will you go? She asked. Only if you help me write the speech, he said. She laughed softly. Then, just write this, she replied. Tell them no leader is great if he forgets the woman who lit the first lamp in his mind. And that's what he did. Because Sundar Pichai never forgot what truly made him, and the world never forgot the day Lakshmi Pichai taught it something no technology ever could, the power of silent love. The world changed. Technology moved faster. Buildings grew taller. Voices grew louder. But one thing stayed the same, a quiet house in Chennai, where an old woman folded clothes with care and made tea for visitors, whether they were neighbors or strangers. Lakshmi Pichai had become a name people now spoke with respect, but she had never once tried to be known. She still walked to the market with a cloth bag. She still watered the plants outside her house, and she still made tea for Sundar every morning, even if he was a world away. One winter morning, Sundar returned home again, quietly, without media, without an announcement. He stood at the front gate, watching his mother tie her sari, just like she always had. "Amma," he said. She turned, surprised, and smiled. "You look tired," she said. "Gently, a little," he replied. "The world doesn't sleep anymore." "Then rest," she said. "The world can wait." That night, they sat in the courtyard, under a quiet sky. Sundar placed a small box on the table. "What is this?" Lakshmi asked. "A gift," he said. She opened it slowly. Inside was a gold pen, engraved with the words, "For the author of my life." Her hands trembled slightly. "I don't write," she whispered. "You did," Sundar said. "Every time you chose kindness over anger. Every time you stood when others would have fallen. Every time you taught me how to be a better man without saying a word." Lakshmi looked at him, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. A few days later, Sundar took Lakshmi to a newly built community center in their neighborhood. She didn't know why he had kept it a secret. The building was small, but beautiful. Children ran across its halls, carrying books, drawing posters, and practicing science experiments with wide eyes. On the wall outside was a simple plaque that read the Lakshmi Pichai Learning Center, where dreams begin with dignity. Lakshmi stepped back, stunned. "You named this after me?" she asked. "Amma," Sundar said. "How could I not?" She walked inside, slowly, her eyes filling with tears as she saw the library shelves, the free classrooms, the food corner for underprivileged students. "They said dreams are for the rich," Sundar whispered. "But this place says otherwise." Volunteers came forwards. Some were former students, some were local mothers, all inspired by her story. They told her how her life had changed theirs, how her strength made them believe they could do more, be more. A young girl stepped forward with a notebook and said, "Auntie, I want to be a teacher, not for money, but to help others like you helped him." Lakshmi placed her hand gently on the girl's head. "Then you've already started," she said. That evening, after the crowd left and the doors closed, Lakshmi sat alone in the courtyard, outside the center. The wind was soft. The stars watched in silence. Sundar came and sat beside her. "Do you remember," he asked, "how people once whispered behind your back?" She smiled gently. "They were just scared of what they didn't understand." "Do you remember when you were insulted on your own street?" "Yes," she said. "Does it hurt now?" Lakshmi looked up at the stars. "No," she whispered, "because what they tried to break made me stronger, and what I thought would silence me became my voice." Sundar took her hand. "Amma," he said, "you changed more lives than any code I've ever written." She looked at him with soft eyes and replied, "And you showed the world that kindness still has power." A month later, a global award for human impact was given to Sundar Pichai. He accepted it from the stage, then walked down, holding the trophy. But instead of keeping it, he flew back to Chennai, walked into the learning center, and placed it in the library. Below it, he placed a small sign. "This belongs to the woman who built me with her silence." Lakshmi never sought fame. She never asked to be remembered, but she was. Not because she shouted, but because she stood. Not because she rose alone, but because she lifted others quietly. And not because she was perfect, but because she was strong, when being strong meant staying kind even when the world was cruel.